I got to break some things down. So the question really is between the relationship between rapid swaps and arbitrage on the app layer. Okay. And so just to let the audience know, THORChain has something called a streaming swap where you take one swap and you break it up into many blocks, right? It allows arbitrageurs to rebalance the pools. A rapid swap, which has been alive for 4 days, and we're up to $2.5 million in volume, which is very impressive for 4 days. The arbitrageurs have learned how to do it. But basically, a rapid swap is like a streaming swap on steroids where you could do multiple swaps intra-block, within the block, if that makes sense. Now, that does not improve the price execution on THORChain, but it makes THORChain faster. And on the first value, we're twice as fast, right? So there's that. We now have faster volume going through THORChain. Very powerful. Now, on the app layer, arbitrageurs can also use the secured assets, right, to arbitrage. And this actually, as far as I understand, will make our quotes better. So just check it out. This is what I'm trying to get to. You have rapid swaps faster. You have arbitrage on the app layer, which means much better price execution potentially. The thing that people ask me, and the thing that I don't understand is, how do these things touch each other? Because the rapid swaps happening on the base layer, arbitrage is happening on the app layer. So it's like, can you break it down from the perspective of an arbitrager? Are these things happening concurrently? Would one arbitrager be
So,
using both things at the same time? Like, how
so,
does that work?
so we are internalizing the arbitrage as part of the ecosystem activity. So, I mean, an arbitrager could come and also have a PTC on Rujira and sell it in the liquidity of the order book, and at the same time buy it cheaper on the base layer. That's a possibility, but realistically, they won't be able to compete with the virtualization strategy, which gives that to everybody, anybody that use Rujira or the Ruji token, or that is another operator on THORChain, effectively partially on a stream of the revenue created by this flow. And what the virtualization strategy does is this mechanism. So you have to understand how things work on THORChain, like the swaps. It's not like on another chain when you can have MEV, because the order of the transaction is defined by the node operators effectively. Here on THORChain, it's deterministic for base layer swaps. It's always ranked. They happen always at the end of the block, and it's always ranked from the highest fee to the lowest fee. So the network makes sense. Network prioritize whatever it's returning the more revenue. And because of that, you cannot have atomicity between the base layer and the app layer. And that's why we came up with a virtualization strategy. So you could not, you cannot have MEV happening, like somebody buying and selling on the app layer, like inside the same block. I'm gonna buy on the app layer where it's cheap and sell on the base layer where it's less cheap, and then we keep going stuff. So that's not possible, because transaction happen in a certain order at the end of the block of THORChain, and after all the transaction from the base layer, the app layer. So we have the virtualization strategy, which use the lending market as a bridge financing for the duration of a block, effectively. And it's going to say, oh, it can look at the state of the base layer pool, say, oh, if you want to buy this quantity of Bitcoin for this amount of USDC or RUN or whatever, you can get that on the base layer. So I'm going to borrow this output that you could get, give it back to you, taking a little premium, because of course you always have incertitudes in the execution inside the block. And now you can do your stuff on Rujira, get via the virtualization strategy access to the base layer liquidity, and keep doing other things. Now where this become, and so that allow atomicity indirectly with the base layer liquidity inside the order book. And then at the end of the block, the virtualization strategy is going to execute this base layer swap and get back whatever, if it was a USDC for BTC, it's going to get back the USDC on the base layer. So let's do the full swap. Somebody wants to buy on the app layer BTC with USDC. The virtualization strategy is going to look how much BTC can get for this quantity of USDC on the base layer. It's going to borrow those BTC, give them, and fill the swap of the buyer, take the USDC, wait for the end of the block. At the end of the block, do the USDC swap on the base layer pools, get back the BTC, repay the loan, and hopefully keep a little margin most of the time at least. And by doing that now, how do we, so by doing that, you have an automatic, so another important innovation we did with Fin 1.2, 1.3, the latest version we released, was this automatic arbitrage at the end of the block. So the virtualization strategy is quoting every block based on the state of the base layer pool. And you will have other source of liquidity that live on the app layer. CCL will be the biggest one to start. And then you have also real user orders and other things. And every block at the end of the block, it will, or actually at the start of the block on Rujira, it will match also different sources of liquidity. And if there is any overlap, the overlap is retained as protocol revenue, and then it flows into the revenue machine and is shared with THORChain and Rujira stackers. And so via this mechanism, we effectively arbitrage between the liquidity available on the app layer and the liquidity in the base layer pool. So whenever a price deviates enough, and right now the deviation required is quite high because base layer imposes a 10 bips fee per leg on secured asset transaction. So that means 20 bips at least. Plus we have the IAM fee of 2.5 bips. Plus we put a 10% margin just in case of intra-block execution. So it's like you need still like a 32.5 bips or so deviation to trigger an arbitrage. But that's still like a much better execution than what you see. Remember, the article I published, we're looking at the typical deviation, and it was like 40 bips in average with over like 30% that were above like 60 bips. Or like, so there's a big gain that we can make by just always arbitraging just slightly above this 32.5 bips. And that will improve the pricing of the base layer. And that's also effectively how we are gonna improve. So that's just for the pricing part here. So, and the same mechanism of virtualization strategy, flowing liquidity back and forth between base layer pool and app layer, can also be used with rapid swaps. And that's how we also help on the speed of execution. So that's the second part of what we were asking about. Now, that's not live yet, but we are, after CCL is out, I think next big things we'll focus on will be improving this virtualization strategy to make it aware a bit less. Now it's kind of quoting a bit blindly. And now next we want to make it aware of the liquidity, not just the liquidity in the base layer pool, but also the state of the swap queue. And that from that moment, the liquidity, the virtualization strategy will be able to see, oh, actually there is this massive 5 million swap. And I have, so it will always be a function of how much liquidity we can grow at the app layer. The more we grow the liquidity, the more we can facilitate those volumes, those arbitrage and generate volume fees. And that's what I've been saying all along. Like it's really the biggest thing we should drive to grow is TVL in IMM pools. That's your biggest contributor to revenue. Will be clearer when I start to, when we have the analytics, and I can show you very precisely how.